We are here having a conversation with Aleks Merhle, a technology licensing specialist, and James Thompson, a technology transfer specialist. Thank you guys for your time. I would like to start by asking you, what is technology transfer?
I'd happy to answer that. Why technology transfer from a university perspective? You're really trying to take ideas, inventions out of a university atmosphere and bring them into practical application. And there's two big things, two big reasons I've found that inventors love, as universities also, inventors and universities love to see technology transferred. First off, it's impact. Impact of the invention. They want to see their invention used in a practical way. And the other, of course, is the potential to generate revenue. But from a faculty perspective, it's been interesting to me as I work with faculty, the majority of them are really interested in impact, not as much in the money.
What can you tell me, Aleks, from your perspective?
Sure. From my perspective, technology licensing, or licensing in general, we principally deal in patents, for example, is just a vehicle for technology transfer. It's one of the modes in which you can get technology from a university setting into the commercial setting and then build a company around that technology or that invention. So from my perspective, I look at universities as a resource that have assets, and those assets are captured in the form of intellectual property, in the form of patents. And then it's my job in the university context to transfer those patents to companies, to individuals who want to practice them and create value in the doing of it.
And you mentioned that this happens usually between universities and industry. Is it unidirectional or does it work both ways?
Actually, it works both ways. It's very important for both industry and university to work together. The industries are helping to provide the needs. What is it that they really need? As well, they can provide a source of funds back to the university in the form of many different ways. It could be consulting for the faculty, it could be licensing revenue from the inventions, as well as commercial sponsored research. So it's actually a very symbiotic relationship between industry and universities, where the universities then provide the inventions, as well as the intellectual capital, physical resources, as well as training for future employees in the companies.
And who are the actors involved in this? Because you're mentioning now that universities do something for industry. And from your perspective, Aleks, who's involved in this? Are you basically dealing in between universities and industry only, or does it happen in between companies as well?
It happens in between companies as well. So in the tech transfer concept, there could be, I think, three groups of principal players, right? And sometimes one individual entity might take two of these roles on. So that would be creators of the intellectual capital, right? So creators of the patents, creators of the technology, universities. But companies can do the same thing. Companies can also generate technology. And for example, if they come up with an idea, a core of an idea, they might then look to a university to generate that idea out more fully, because they might not be in the best position to take on the risk associated with something that's new or something that's novel. So in that case, you have both a university and a private sector company generating ideas and working together to develop them to a point where there's a commercially viable product or technology or service. In all of that, intellectual property is developed. And in all of that, there's costs. So the costs can be borne by the university in some cases. They have endowments that they fund research with. They have funds in some cases that they fund research with, or by the private sector companies that have profits and losses, right? So they have R&D budgets. Depending on how those R&D budgets are allocated, it could be shared, it could be through a joint venture. At the end of that process, you get products and technology. I step in almost as a broker or a middleman, facilitating the relationships between the entities, and then also the transactions between the entities. And in any one of those stages, you might need capital, right? So I might not need capital to work on a particular project to help a university identify its valuable assets, or the university might need capital to develop some of those assets further. And in some cases, you might access capital markets as a result. So in effect, you have three types of principal functions. One is the research and development function, generating the ideas, generating the intellectual capital. Another is the financial capital to make all of that possible. And the third is sort of a legal transactional framework. And that's where companies like mine and also law firms in certain instances come in to make sure that the transactions are running smoothly and efficiently between those parties, and to bring the parties together in hopefully the most efficient way possible.
That's really interesting, because in my mind, universities should be educating people, but you guys are getting into business. Why is that?
It's a really good question. Universities previously have only been looked at from an educational component. Let's just educate the populace so that we can advance society. But there's so much more to it. There's also the research component. So University of Utah is a major research university, and there's a lot of amazing research that comes out of the university. Now you can imagine that research could be used for multiple purposes. It could be used for academics. It's nice to be able to publish in a high-ranking journal. Nice to get that Nature or Science article. The faculty love it. At the same time, though, if all of these inventions, if all these great discoveries occur only in a book, they're only talked about in a book, nothing comes from it. And so you want to actually get the inventions out. You want to see it come out. And so there's the threefold missions to many universities, and we're looking at them now in this light, both training as well as academic research, and then as economic engines. There's actually a great contribution that the universities make to the economy, not only in hiring individuals, paying those individuals then use their wages in the economy, they pay taxes. In addition, the economic impact that the commercialization of those inventions can have. So it actually can create, and you can imagine though, if you now start having this money flowing from the university and you have businesses that are created and more people are then being hired and more taxes are being paid, then that's going to help to create this ecosphere, economic ecosphere around the university.
That's really interesting. Because basically you're telling me that the role of universities is shifting from just educating people and obviously in developed countries doing research now to actively participating in the economy, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Is all of this good? Is there any dark side to all this? Aleks, what's your opinion on this?
Sure, is there a dark side to it? I imagine there probably is. I try not to focus on it if there is, and I haven't really given it that much thought. I think the positive sides certainly outweigh whatever the dark sides might be. Principally, and the reason I think universities, at least in the United States, which I think both James and I can speak to most directly, they really are the right venue for some early stage research and commercialization because those types of activities are fundamentally risky. So in one respect, having a university not necessarily have its P&L, its profits and losses dictated entirely by the research and development that it undertakes insulates it from some of that risk because it has other profit centers. It has students that are paying an annual tuition. It has an endowment that's hopefully earning some income back. So it allows them to take bigger risks in what is fundamentally a difficult and risky endeavor, which is research and development. And it's those risks, it's those university research developed ideas that eventually become, in many instances, big companies and big success stories. But I think if you took a lot of them out of the university sector and you put them in private institutions, you wouldn't see a lot of those success stories because managers would say, this is too expensive. Why aren't you performing? It's been 2 quarters, maybe 3 quarters, 4 quarters. Universities can have a longer view of things because it's not their only function. James mentioned sort of the 3-pillared approach, whereas companies are strictly profit and loss. So in that respect, I think the U.S. at least, and I think a lot of other countries in Europe as well, but have identified universities as an excellent source for early stage research and development in particular. But then it outgrows that. And it's when it outgrows the university setting, when it really is ready for the prime time for a profit and loss sort of environment, that technology and individuals and companies move out of the university center into the private sector and really focus on selling their commercial product. And very often, you really do have the people move as well. So a researcher within a university could become the CTO at a startup company, for example, and leave his post or her post. He doesn't necessarily have to, but that happens pretty frequently.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely can. And to add to that, there are some faculty, even at the University of Utah and other universities, who believe that we're doing something that shouldn't be done. That we're taking something that's a pure academic play by trying to commercialize the technology. They see some negatives there by saying that the whole idea of academia is this free flow of information. And I understand that. And I think that's actually really, really important. We try on the commercialization side not to be a hindrance to their academic pursuits. However, this is an opportunity for us to take and enhance their impact, not only from an academic perspective, from a publications perspective, but also then from that commercial side. And I have said, you asked, is it possible that there are some drawbacks? There have been some concerns faculty have brought up that maybe the companies are going to dictate their research objectives. That actually doesn't occur. I mean, if the research objectives of the faculty and the company are aligned, and it's an opportunity for the company to provide funding to that researcher, both goals are accomplished. And then it's up to the university then to make sure that you organize the deal in such a way that the faculty is able to get what they want, publications, and the company is able to get what they want, advancement of their ideas, whatever it is that they are looking for. So I think that there's actually a lot of benefit to doing this, and it really doesn't impact dramatically the academic research focus and then training of the students, the other two pillars of a university's focus.
And if I might add one point, though, I think perception of what the role of a university is, it will impact what you think the dark side sort of might be of that university, right? So at least from, I think, both James and my perspective, one of the other positive aspects is that universities can serve a public good, right? So that's actually one of the reasons that in the US you have the Bayh-Dole Act that requires when federal dollars are spent on university research that the university has an obligation then to try to commercialize that technology on the principle that the federal tax dollars have been taken from individuals. They're then reinvested back into the university to fund research. The university should then have an obligation to reinvest the fruits of that research, which was paid for with federal dollars, back into the greater society. So that's a public good question. Now, if you don't believe that universities or government should be playing that public good role, which is a possible and legitimate view, then you might look at that function as a dark side or an evil, or at least something that should be discouraged. As both James and I sort of have the opposite view on that, I think that's one of the glaring benefits or positive aspects of a university because they are able to take on those more difficult and risky projects in concert with the government, right? So the government shares some of that risk. And through that, you've had some really big success stories. So, for example, the internet, arguably, right? Through early DARPA research and DARPA federal dollars in the university setting, a lot of that development was done as well. And other projects that we could certainly start listing and pointing toward. Is that a good or is it not? I think it's in the eye of the beholder.
I see that there may be a dilemma here. Definitely the benefits outweigh the dark side somehow because, for instance, you were saying, Alex, that sometimes companies are not willing to take the risk with certain types of research, and research is fundamental for any innovation, right? So that's a mission that perhaps is going to be fulfilled by the universities. Yeah, but don't you feel that somehow perhaps if I am a scientist and I am hired by a big pharma, for instance, somehow by receiving money from them, this would compromise my agenda and somehow I would be less willing to disclose information for the greater good of society at the stake of all these other goals. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because the way people could see this is I either publish something in a journal that is going to benefit people or someone is just going to appropriate this knowledge through a patent. Is there somehow a place to counterbalance this?
Absolutely there is. And that's where the Technology Transfer Office really comes into play. And depends on the university. At our university, there's the Technology Transfer Office where there's the transfer actually of technology intellectual property out. And there's also an Office of Sponsored Projects. Many universities, those are one and of the same, but essentially it's the individuals responsible for making sure the agreement is crafted in a way that the faculty member is able to accomplish their academic purposes and goals. There are always ways that you can make this work. I've done multiple deals with pharma, and in those deals, even pharma admits they want to see the fruits of the research out. All they ask for is give us a period of time to protect it before you publish it. So it makes it actually really nice. I really think that there's a way that both parties can win. And it's part of the negotiation with the company and also with the faculty member.
Okay, yeah. It sounds interesting because the way I see this now is that perhaps you don't have conflicting benefits here, but they kind of complement each other.
Yes.
And it's a matter of just balancing everything, right?
Absolutely. I can actually give you an example. I can't say the specific company involved, but there was a large pharma involved that wanted to sponsor research at the University of Utah. And in the agreement, we just put in that there was a 6-month delay on publications. And I've seen them anywhere from 30 days to 6 months. We usually don't like to go over 6 months. And so it was just a delay in the amount of time it took them, the faculty member, to publish. That gave the research, the pharma company enough time to protect any invention that came out. And then the faculty member was able to publish. So everyone was able to get what they wanted, and it really didn't cause a conflict. Whereas it was actually fascinating initially, faculty member resisted just a little bit, saying, well, I don't want to be stopped at all from publishing this. And what I helped them to see was it actually takes them a few months to work with their graduate students and their postdocs to prepare the publications. Well, why don't you use that blackout period to prepare the publication? And once the blackout period's over, you submit it for publication, you've accomplished what you want, and the company gets what they want. So again, there's always a way to make it work.
Alex, could you confirm this assumption that I'm making? From what you're saying, James, they should patent first, because as long as the knowledge hasn't been published, you can patent. Because if they publish the paper first, then it's public knowledge already, and you couldn't patent. Am I right with that?
That's correct. So it would be the publishing of the paper would be a disclosure of the subject matter that could be patentable. It might not be. If the subject matter isn't patentable, then there's no conflict there. But it's better safe than sorry, I think, in that scenario. Certainly.
Okay. So if I got you right, then patents precede publications, and publications in the worst case scenario just get delayed.
That's right.
Right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
It doesn't always happen that way. In the scenario that James described, it does.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'd even say that perhaps in one respect, if you look at the way you look at things, a positive externality of having the relationship with the private sector would be to ensure that university researchers who do have this drive to publish, right? They want to let the world know what their research what has accomplished. Sometimes they get a little bit ahead of themselves and maybe forget the patenting process or forget the importance of protecting their inventions. Now, that doesn't necessarily waste, from a public perspective, the fruits of their labor, but it does waste from a university or from a researcher perspective, the ability to capture that in intellectual property. What is intellectual property? What is a patent? I like to think of it as almost a funnel system where you have all of these inputs, the university research dollars, the federal research dollars, the private sector contributions, whatever it may be, coming in through a process. And that process is a process of innovation and invention. And all of that in the end is captured in what I think of as like a container. And that container is a patent. And that patent holds all of the kinetic energy, I like to think of it as, just stored within its four corners, right? And it's made possible by the legal systems that are in place to imbue that document, that four-cornered document, with that sort of kinetic energy, the innovation, everything that was put into it. If you publish too early, you sort of eliminate the walls of that document, right? You've lost that energy. You've put it out into the world, but you're not able, the people who contributed to its development, to then monetize it. And you should be able to, right? As an inventor, as the person creating the good, we do principally have a patent system to encourage the ability of those individuals to see a benefit from it. Because at the end of the day, that is what people in some respects are motivated by. And they should be able, if they so choose, to see rewards. So you have the two interests, the private sector interest of wanting to make sure that the patent happens and is granted, right? So that they can then see a benefit. And then you have the academics' interest in publishing, and by working together, you sort of get the best of both worlds because it's a checks and balances system in that respect. So that could be a positive externality, I think, of relationships. I'm sure there are also negative ones, but I, again, prefer to focus on the positive.
And if I can build on that, actually, you brought up a really good point that developing intellectual property allows the company, gives the company incentive to develop a product even further. So the challenge is I've seen it multiple times where a publication was released before we had a chance to evaluate the technology and protect it. And companies have approached us and then said, well, it's a shame that we weren't able to get a patent filed because now they don't have the economic incentive to invest in developing that product. And which is fascinating to think about. You think, well, wait a second. So by accomplishing the academic perspective, academic purposes by publishing, is that actually harming the potential impact of your invention? And in some cases, the answer really is yes. Because the companies don't then have that incentive, the ability to, well, intellectual property is a negative rights, the ability to keep competition out for a certain period of time in recognition of the investment and the time, effort, and energy that you put in to develop this intellectual property and the product that it supports.
And also in exchange for making it public, because that's sort of the tit for tat of the patent system, is that you are able to get protection for a period of time, but you have to make it public. It's searchable, it's out there, it's published in the patent office, and in that way other people can look at the information. They can come up with ideas based on information. It's just within the four corners of what that patent protects. The owner has a negative right. But the exchange there is really one of publication as well. You make it public, you make it a public good, but you're rewarded for the effort and the innovation that you put in with a limited period of exclusivity.
Absolutely.
So if I'm getting you right, then you have universities, governments, and industry collaborating with each other yeah, creating intellectual property, and then that's transformed into public goods, yeah, somehow, because for some people that means taxes. Companies get money out of selling these products. The university gets research funding. Are these patents the only way in which you guys interact? Is there anything else apart from patents that basically transforms all these ideas into something else, or?
Oh, there's definitely other ways. So a few of the ways would be in other intellectual property vehicles, copyright. So software copyright, creative works, trademarks. There's also trade secrets. Sometimes there's tips and tricks that faculty don't put in a publication. And they're not trying to keep anything out. It just doesn't make sense to put it in a publication. In those cases, you can license those out. It's not common, but I have licensed out and licensed in when I was in the private sector trade secrets. There's other ways that they can interact, though. Industry can interact with universities if they don't have a piece of equipment and they want to utilize it. We have a great center at the university where I currently work, University of Utah. It's a Center for Engineering Innovation, where if companies don't have it's very expensive for them to purchase a piece of equipment and use it maybe once a month. Especially if that piece of equipment is, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. We provide mechanisms for them to come in and use that equipment. Of course, we charge them for it. We get money, and then it's helpful for them because then they don't have to incur the capital expenses. So I think there's multiple ways that universities can really interact. There's also ways where if the companies that we start, from our technologies. It's not like we just give them the technology and say, go on your way, and then just cut us the check. We still work with them. We help them if they want to write a business plan or we do business model canvases, do a business model canvas. If they need assistance with marketing, assistance finding investment or entrepreneurs, there's still a lot of work that we do with our licensees, our spin-off companies. And in addition, I take that another level where the existing companies, maybe they haven't licensed technology from us, we're working with them, trying to get their feedback on our inventions and also to identify what their needs are. So we're trying to balance all these things. So I would definitely say there's many ways that universities and academia, universities and industry work together.
Yeah, because I can imagine consultancy, I don't know, perhaps companies can fund PhD students, master students.
Oh, that happens all the time.
Contract research and things like those.
Oh, yes.
Aleks, do you help companies when they have these other ways of interacting with academia, when they are not necessarily patenting something? Do you help them somehow?
No, so for the most part, in my company, and in patent licensing, I am a licensing expert, and beyond that, it's patent licensing. Right? That's the field that we play in. So the core good that we need to be present is a patent, because then it's transactable. Because it provides that negative right, and people pay in order to be free from that negative right, like a lease almost, right? So a lease for the use of the intellectual space that you're occupying by making or doing something. There are other interactions, if I were in a different line of business, that might be possible, right? So for example, you'd still want some intellectual property there because it gives some protection to the ultimate business, for just as an example. But if you looked at the University of Utah that has 3,000 something on the order of that number of patents, you can look at individual clusters there, and some of those might have been companies that they tried to start up but then didn't work for one reason or another. Others might be technologies that weren't quite ready for the market. Others could be technologies that weren't quite ready for the geography where they tried to be implemented. And others might just be things that didn't work out from a technological perspective. But in that, if you have third-party experts, whether it's my company or financial experts or entrepreneurs, come in and canvas what's been developed already, they might find value. And to me, that's really what it's about. It's about unlocking value of intellectual capital, unlocking the value of innovation. And by taking a second look and sort of tilling through what's already been done and maybe put on the shelf for a bit, you could find new opportunities, build new businesses, identify new markets that those technologies might work in. And it might not be that you need the intellectual property to protect it. Some people might value that less. Some geographies value that less, or it's less important. So it's not strictly speaking necessary to have an intellectual property component. It just so happens that the line of business that I'm in, the work that my company does, it is the principal unit that we transact in.
And apart from the benefits that you guys already mentioned, from a national perspective, a much wider perspective, why technology transfer is so important for countries?
So you're talking about the direct benefits. So there's the direct benefits of tax revenue that's coming out. I mean, in indirect kind of way, of course. It filters down. But there's also the indirect benefits of being able to grow entrepreneurs, individuals who have been successful in commercializing technologies with these startup companies, whether it's a startup or developing products. So you're training individuals in real world practical applications. So that I think is a huge benefit. In addition, now you're also generating products that are helpful for the good of the society. So I think there are actually a lot of not only direct benefits, just looking at the cash, but also these indirect benefits. And what ends up happening is, oftentimes you will have these really neat ecospheres developing around universities. So Research Triangle is a really good example. At the University of Utah, we're trying, in Salt Lake, we have a core of medical device companies, something that we're really pretty good at. And it's actually kind of fun because then investors want to come in and they want to, they're always asking us, what else do you have? I made money on you before. So what you're doing is you're bringing more capital in. You're going to be able to bring in more trained people. That's going to attract a more trained population as well. It's going to incentivize the people that are there to get that training, to be able to get those good jobs. So I think overall, it elevates the whole society.
Yeah, and I'd add, if you're a country, if you're making high-level decisions about how to allocate your resources, and I think you need to look at your people as resources. Individual capital, individual time. So every person in your society has a certain number of hours a day that they could spend doing something. And you can try to direct them if you're the government, in one direction or another. And there's basically two things that you could do. You could either spend your time on physical labor, right, manual labor of one sort. So there's manual capital, potentially, or intellectual capital, intellectual labor, innovative labor. Both of those things take time, right? And there's only so many hours in a day. Physical labor it's absolutely necessary, and there's people who need to be in that position in every country. But if your society is built principally around manual labor, the cheapest hour of the least capable person who can perform a certain job is the maximum that value that's going to generate for the society and for the individuals. And that has a cap, right? That has a cap because it's limited by the ability to do something. And that really is just how quickly you can do it within a day. Whereas intellectual capital, intellectual labor, it's not limitless in the sense that people say you can accomplish anything. There's laws of physics and things that we have to pay attention to. But we do continue advancing step by step, sort of beyond, I think, what generations before would have believed is possible. And that is where real value is unlocked. Now, it's difficult. You have to maintain that kind of economy because everyone else is trying to develop that. But anyone can do it. Intellectual capital is equally dispersed, in my personal opinion, around the world. Here in Guatemala, there's just as many intelligent, brilliant people per capita as there are in the United States, or as there are in China. And those ideas need to be unlocked. And it's sort of the unlocking of those ideas that generates real value for a society. So to the extent you can direct the economy at least a little bit, to give people the opportunity, to give those brilliant people that do exist in the society the opportunity to contribute their ideas, to unlock them, to give them as a gift to the rest of the world, and also see a personal benefit from a financial perspective if that's what they're interested in, you absolutely have to do that. Not just for you, but also for the individuals. Give those individuals that power and give the rest of the world that power.
And it's amazing because from what I've heard, technology transfer means basically amplifying the landscape of possibilities for any country.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You have great potential here.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.